On today's episode of Let's Find a Niche, we have Sharena, the last of the Asker trio I have yet to cover. Sharena is unfortunately one of the worst units in the game because of the fact that she is an Asker trio unit, meaning she doesn't get merges, which is going to be one of the bigger problems for someone like her. I will mention the fact that she does have one of the better stat lines between the three, given that she has relatively balanced stats all across: 32 attack, 32 speed, 29 defense, 22 resistance. It's not bad by any means at all. In fact, it's actually really solid when you consider the fact that she's actually relatively offensive, even though her stats are outdated. You can give her flowers to boost it up to 35, which is way better than it starts at. However, because she can't get any merges, she can't get access to even more stats, which is going to be the bigger problem. Because if she were to get merges, she'd probably be the best of the three. And she probably still is the best of the three anyway, because of just how her stat line is and her weapon. Speaking of her weapon, Fensalir is actually really solid, all things considered. The base of the weapon essentially neutralizes any visible buffs of the foe during combat, which is actually really solid because that means you can't really set up against her. And then you also have the refine part, which is just speed, defense, bond, which isn't the worst. It's not good for Aether Raids, but it's actually pretty solid for PvE and Arena too at times. So I'd say her weapon's actually really decent. It's just that she is just really outdated because of the fact that she can't get merges. But thankfully, because of stuff like bonus seasons, where she's a rotating bonus, she can get more stats, which would actually help her out in the long term, especially for something like Aether Raids. For Aether Raids, she can actually use a good amount of weaponry if she really wants to. But for this example, I'm going to be using her preferred weapon and then one inheritable, because I think these are like two of her better kits in Aether Raids during her bonus season. And I would never really recommend using her outside of her bonus season because just the fact that she just doesn't get the stats that she would need. But for these two examples, she has bonus stats. So the first one, we have her preferred weapon, Fensalir, Noontime, Distant Counter, Spurn 3, Pulse Smoke, and Speed Res Solo 3. Another standard Spurn tank set. It's not really anything too unique, but because she has workable speed and she has decent attack, she can actually use it fairly well in her bonus season. As she starts out with a base of 42 with the refined Fensalir, she gets 6 more speed from Speed Res Solo, making it 48. And before any blessings come into account, she can easily raise it up to 51, 54. She could get more resistance from air. She could get more stats from Milla, Freya, Dagger, so on and so forth. It's not a bad set by any means for her. I would recommend something like that for light season, especially if you're going up against stuff like Bramimond, who is going to be hitting really, really hard. You probably want something that can negate a lot of his damage, which is why you probably want something like Spurn and then Speed Res Solo. And she does get plenty of attack, 58 with the boon and flowers, of course. You could always try and raise it up with visible buffs and the like. But I think what makes her different from a lot of other characters is the fact that her weapon just gets rid of all debuffs, or gets rid of all buffs, which is really, really solid, especially against foes that have visible buffs. Now granted, you can run stuff like Panic if you want to get rid of like visible buffs on the foe, but then that doesn't really cover stuff like Odd Recovery, which just fixes that. But nonetheless, it's still very, very solid. And then for Astra Season, you have its Curtains, Gale Force, Flashing Blade 4, Wings of Mercy 3, Times Pulse 3, and Swift Sparrow 2. This is just her acting as a means of a Gale Force support during like a Gale Force turn 1 chain, if you really want to use her like that. With Curtains, it's 3. She always starts with a 3 cooldown Gale Force. Times Pulse will make it 2, and then Flashing Blade, if she hits and makes a check, that'll turn into 0. Which means she doesn't have to worry about one-shotting foes because she could get the Gale Force off. As long as there isn't any guard or like stance 4 skills on the team, you should be fine. And then Swift Sparrow 2 is just so because she's going to be initiating combat, she wants extra speed for her check and an extra attack so she can deal with the foe. Another standard set per se, it's a bit expensive, but it works relatively well if you want to use her like that in her bonus season. It's pretty much all she really has going for her on her bonus seasons, at least for Aether Raids. You could probably use other stuff like Springy Lance Plus if you want to use that, because that can neutralize the penalties on yourself and grant extra speed for Spurn tanking. You could use Brave Lance, Ninja Yari, so on and so forth. Speaking of Ninja Yari, we also have a set or two for Arena and Arena Assault. Now, because she is a rotating bonus, you can use her as a score unit. Granted, it's not necessarily the best score unit, but you could use her as one nonetheless. You can keep her preferred weapon with the Bond Refine, Blue Flame, Blue Dual Infantry 4, Special Spiral 3, Oath, and the Bond. Now, the Oath and the Bond actually pair up really well together because of the fact that she wants to be near her allies, like adjacent, which means she could use Blue Flame for 25 extra points of damage, she could get her Fencer going off, she could get her Bond going off, and she could get visible buffs. And with the extra sets she gains from her bonus season and Blue Dual Infantry 4, she can actually become relatively tanky. And then if you want to use her with a Special Spiral, that can make it so every time a foe initiates combat on her, you can use Blue Flame against a foe. Unless they're running Guard again, but that really shouldn't be an issue all too much. And because Arena is full of visible buffs, Fencer is actually a very solid weapon for Arena because of the fact that it just neutralizes visible buffs. Meaning it would be Sharena versus just a regular unit without any buffs. But also, it doesn't neutralize her own buffs, so she can actually get more stats going for her. Of course, you could always replace attack speed Oath if you want to, if you can't afford that, with a smoke or something. You'll always have rallies going anyway, so she doesn't really need the Oath if you don't want to use that. It's just more of a convenience factor more than anything else. And then you have, for Arena Assault, Ninja Yari, Moonbow, Double Death Blows, you have Low Speed Defense, and Times Pulse. This is just more of a means of trying to output damage because of the fact that she has Ninja Yari equipped and no merges, and no bonus sets in Arena Assault. Her attack is going to suffer for that, which is why you probably want like Death Blow 4 and Death Blow 3, which would give her an additional 14 points of attack, which actually helps a lot because it ends up stacking really well. And a low speed defense, so you can actually end up potentially quadding and doing more damage. Times Pulse is there, so you can start out with a 1 cooldown Moonbow, which means you can always trigger a Moonbow whenever you initiate combat, and if the foe lives, you can trigger it twice. And that's basically the idea between this set. You want to deal with the foe as much as possible with Double Death Blow. You want to output as much damage as you can, and try and make sure she can kill before the foe can initiate combat back, or retaliate. And then finally we have some regular general use builds. We have Fencer with Moonbow, Attack Speed Bond 4, Null Follow-Up, Joint Drive Attack, and Speed Defense Bond 3. This is just here to take more advantage of her Bond Refine because of the fact that most of the time you're not really going to see visible buffs or debuffs or anything in PvE content. You can just stack up bonds instead, and she can actually be used as a relatively good speedy defense tank. And Null Follow-Up is just there so you can bypass anything that like stops her from getting 2 attacks going and prevent the foe from doubling unnaturally with a guaranteed follow-up. And then for the other build, we have Springy Lance Plus, Gale Force, Flashing Blade 4, Close Call, Attack Speed Menace, and Attack Speed Solo 3. Springy Lance is actually a good option here. Even though there aren't generally a lot of debuffs, you can still make it sure that she guarantees gets 5 attack and 5 speed from her weapon. Flashing Blade 4 is just so you can Gale Force way more easily. Even though it's at 5 cooldown, it shouldn't be a problem if the foe can initiate back, which is why we have Close Call here. This is going to be a hit and run set where you can hit the foe with Gale Force or Flashing Blade 4 twice. If they can retaliate back, then you'll get your Gale Force off so long as you make your Flashing Blade checks, which is why we also have Attack Speed Menace, which is still a relatively new and expensive skill, but you can use it either way because it will help raise her attack and speed and then lower the foe's attack and speed, which can make Flashing Blade 4 checks way easier to proc. Of course, you could also replace that with Odd Tempest or Even Tempest if you want to. It's not a bad option by any means if you wanted to focus on her hit and run stuff instead of focusing on her Flashing Blade 4 thing. Nonetheless, with Springy Lance Attack Speed Solo, she shouldn't be failing her Flashing Blade checks all that easily. In fact, she should be able to get her Flashing Blade checks going all the time, as long as the foe doesn't have guard or anything of the sort. And yeah, that's about Sharena, really. Sharena's kind of bad, unfortunately, but she does have a lot going for her, and I think she would benefit the most out of the 3 Asker Trio units if she were to get merges. And honestly, I think she should get merges. I think all of the Asker Trio units should get merges because her weapon is actually really good and she has access to all these lances that she can use. And her Salen's actually not that bad. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you agree with any of these builds? Do you have other builds in mind that you use? Let me know down below. I always like to hear what you have to say. And until next time, thanks for watching.